Hey guys, hoping all is well with everybody. In this video we're going to be continuing the read-along of the Heroic Dog Stories by Aloud Jefferson, and today's story is entitled Lasse and Amundsen. Due to the length of this story, I'm going to be breaking it apart into two videos. But let's begin, and as always I'm going to be showing you any pictures as we come across them. Lasse and Amundsen. Lasse and Aloud Amundsen were among the first to reach the South Pole. Before telling their story, just a few words about the poles. The poles. Ancient astronomers had figured out that the Earth was round and that it turned on its axis from west to east each day. They had even calculated the size of the Earth within 0.5%. Other the following centuries, scientists and explorers filled in the details of the globe with longitude and latitude refinements and the technology to determine them. The North and South poles are simply where the Earth's axis ends at its surface, and are directly opposite each other. Explorers wanted to be first in finding the poles and where they were. The North Pole is over the open sea and is covered with big ice blocks. The sea is more than 13,000 feet deep at that point. In 1908, Frederick Cook claimed he stood at the North Pole, but reviews of his records by a commission ruled he had insufficient proof. Robert Peary then claimed he had reached the North Pole in 1909. His claim was accepted for years, but now it's thought he may have just come within 60 miles of the pole, but did not reach it. Aloud Amundsen flew over the North Pole in 1926. Curiously, the first person to reach the North Pole on foot wasn't until a Russian expedition did it in 1948. The Russians had flown in and landed near the pole. The North Pole is now a regular tourist attraction. The South Pole is over land, in the continent of Antarctica. Reports of the continent being sighted were made in the early 1800s. Robert Scott explored the continent in 1902 with Ernst Shackleton. They reached 80 degrees south. 90 degrees south is the South Pole. Shackleton came back in 1909 and reached 88 degrees south. Lasse. Lasse grew up in North Greenland, a division of Greenland on the northwest coast. This was a sled dog country. The dogs are bred to work. The dogs, once called Eskimo dogs, are now called Greenland dogs. Lasse was almost pure black, but the dogs come in all colors and have a thick woolly undercoat and a waterproof overcoat that keeps them very warm at very low temperatures. The dogs are an ancient breed in the Spitz group of dogs and have that group's curled tail and short triangular ears. When Amundsen ordered 100 dogs, Lasse was in the group. They were shipped to Norway on a steam merchant ship, the Hans Egata. This ship was sunk by a German U-boat in 1942. The dogs had a long, hard sail over and made it to Norway in bad condition. They were kept in an ancient fortress for over a month before boarding Andersen's boat, Fram. The deck for the dogs had been constructed using a raised floor so air could circulate on warm days, and if water came onto the deck, the dogs were above it. Lasse's given name was Lars, but Lasse and Lassesen were his nicknames. In his book of the expedition, Amundsen wrote of how Lasse was the wildest dog to come on board the boat and that it took weeks to tame him. At first, Lasse bared his teeth whenever he walked near him. Amundsen tried patting him with a stick and the dog broke it in two. They kept Lasse tied near Fix, his friend from Greenland, in hopes he'd simmer down. Aloud Amundsen. Amundsen was a Norwegian. His family was one of ship owners and ship captains. His mother wanted a different life for him, so he began studying medicine. His mother died when he was 21, and he promptly left college and went to sea. He'd been tempted by the stories of the explorers of the period and decided that was life he wanted for himself. On Amundsen's first ship, on a Belgian exploration of the waters around Antarctica, he was a first mate. Amundsen got his first taste of adventure when the ship got iced in and spent the winter there, the first ship to ever do that. He also learned how to avoid scurvy on that trip. Frederick Cook was the ship's doctor and supplied the ship with fresh meat to give them a supply of vitamin C. Amundsen soon led his own expeditions. Explorers had long tried to navigate the waters north of Canada to find the Northwest Passage, a one-way trip from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. Amundsen bought a small boat that floated high in the water, and with a crew of 5, others made the complete voyage from 1903 to 1906 by following closely to shore. Twice they were wintered on King William's Island. It was during these winters that he learned about sled dogs and wearing animal skins for warmth. He had always known how to ski, but he learned that skiing along with dog sleds was the fastest method over land. Amundsen's plan for the North Atlantic and change of plans. Amundsen's next adventure was to leave in the summer of 2010 to probe the ice fields in the North Atlantic and to be the first to reach the North Pole. His boat, the Fram, had been used in Arctic waters on other expeditions. It was a short, fat boat with a rounded bottom. The design allowed the boat to simply rise above freezing ice rather than be crushed by it. He selected his crew and meticulously outfitted it for the trip north. However, in September 2009, newspapers reported that both Scott and Peary had reached the North Pole. While Amundsen's North Atlantic trip had some scientific goals, he really wanted to be the first to the North Pole. So, in secret, Amundsen decided to compete to be the first to reach the South Pole. He told only his brother and the man who would captain his ship. He quickly ordered 100 dogs from Greenland, as well as sleds, harnesses, and food for the dogs. The ship's last stop in Norway was in Kristiansand. The crew was confused to see all the dogs and the equipment being loaded, as the Arctic trip was planning stops in Alaska, where there were plenty of dogs and sleds. It wasn't until they reached Madeira, a group of islands west of Morocco owned by Portugal, that he told the crew of his plans and gave them an opportunity to leave. None did. In Madeira, he also sent a telegram to Robert Scott, who was already on his way to attempt to reach the South Pole on his second try. Later, Amundsen received a lot of bad press in England for sneaking down to the south. The Fram was a 3-masted sailing ship with a Swedish engine. It had a windmill to power electric lights. The boat was well stocked. There were sections for a sturdy hut he had built. It would be 26 by 13 feet and included a 6 by 13 foot kitchen. In addition to 97 dogs, there were 19 men, 4 pigs, 6 carrier pigeons, and a canary. There were skis, lumber, cloth, clothing, tents, and navigation equipment. Over 3,000 books were loaded. Amundsen had carefully calculated the food they would need and added enough spirits to allow a small sip on Saturday and Sunday nights. They even had a record player and a few records. They reached Antarctica on December 14, 2010. Amundsen anchored Fram in the Bay of Whales. He knew that Scott would be at McMurdo Sound and follow the same direction that Shackleton had. Scott would have 60 more miles to go to the pole, but Amundsen would have found his way over the mountains while Scott would follow Shackleton's route. When they anchored, the men made a camp 2 miles inland. First, they dug a 4-foot foundation for the hut, then assembled it. It wasn't until January 27th that the hut was finished and all the material had been moved to the inland site. Tents and snow caves were used to store the material and the dogs. This time allowed the men to arrange the dogs in working teams and to train them. Next, they made 3 trips to store material to be used along their route to the pole. These trips took from February 10th to April 11th, during which they stored 7,500 pounds of food and supplies. On these trips, they found that 6 dogs per sled were not enough and decided they would take more dogs and fewer men on the trip to the pole. The sun set on April 21st, and they would have 4 months without it. Amundsen get a regular schedule of work for the men. During this time, they reconstructed the sleds, making them 30% lighter. They made skis and lightweight tents with floors. They made biscuits and pemmican for the trip. And that is where we will stop about midway for the story of Lasse and Amundsen. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the second part of the story of Lasse and Amundsen. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day. Take good care. Bye.